Halacha Yomi. We're up to page 423. 12. Hatmana is only prohibited with food or liquid that's a kli rishon. Right, so you have food that was cooking in the original pot, you cooked it in. That's where you're not allowed to wrap on Shabbat with blankets. But if I switch it to a second vessel, kli sheni, once the food or liquid is placed in kli sheni, it is permitted to do hatmana, right? Therefore, it is permitted to pour hot water into a thermos or a closed hot cup on Shabbat, since it's a kli sheni. Or let's say, remember that story with the babulia, her plata broke. She wanted to go to her daughter's house. We said, you're not allowed to wrap that pot of those swole blankets on Shabbat to take it to the daughter's house. It's a sur. What she can do is she can transfer the pot to a different pot, kli sheni, and then she can wrap the blankets and it'll be mutar. We said yesterday, 13, you're allowed to insulate cold food. Let's say you want to keep something cold, you're allowed to wrap it to keep it cold on Shabbat. 14, one may do hatmana on a food from Erev Shabbat that one will eat on Motzei Shabbat, as long as you don't cover it with the food with the item that doesn't generate heat. Okay. 16. A woman may reheat a baby's bottle on Shabbat by putting the cold bottle, into a hot cup of water in a kli sheni. Even though the water is like surrounding the bottle, it's like hatmana, it's mutar. It's a kli sheni. 17. One may place a bag of rice or barley or kishka or kugel in an aluminum foil or a cooking bag in the pot of chamin before Shabbat, and that's not considered hatmana. Even on Shabbat, it is permitted to do so, provided that both the food in the pot and the food you're putting in there is fully cooked, and it's also on a hot plate. 18. It is permissible to place an egg on chamin before Shabbat, even though the egg has a shell. It's not considered hatmana. 19. One who wants to cover a pan of food with a layer of aluminum and place it on the hot plate or top of a pot that's on the fire may do so, since you're doing it to prevent things from falling inside, or it should not dry out. However, one may cover it only with one covering. Covering with multiple layers is a sur. So you hear this? A guy has those aluminum trays that people cook in, and he wants to heat it on the plata, reheat it, right? And he wants to cover it with aluminum foil. One sheet he's allowed, because the idea is, I don't want it to dry out. I want it to keep it moist, or I don't want things to fall inside. But if you put multiple layers, that's a sur, because that's hatmana already. Multiple layers of aluminum is like covering with multiple layers with blankets. Okay, 20. It is common for people on Shabbat to wrap and warm up cold dry foods like schnitzel, bread, and things that have been cooked before Shabbat and heated up on Shabbat with wrapped in aluminum. Those people have what to rely on, but better not to wrap the food and to be stringent. Better to be stringent. Okay, crock pot. 21. It is permissible to place raw food in a crock pot before Shabbat, so that it will cook through the night in preparation for the morning, Shabbat morning. However, one must either cover or remove the knob that controls the temperature, and one may not cover the top of the pot with towels. If you want to eat the food Friday night, so you also have to cover the bottom of the crock pot, the inside, with a thick layer of aluminum, because otherwise there'll be a problem of hatmana with something that adds heat. It is a sur Erev Shabbat to wrap food with things that add heat, and the crock pot adds heat. So therefore, a person has to be careful to layer the bottom with a thick layer of aluminum. And that way, it's considered. That way, you avoid this issue. Yeah, let's read the footnote 30. It is very common to use a crock pot or a slow cooker for preparing food such as chamin for Shabbat morning. The crock pot has a pot inside that's placed inside a mechanism that has a heating element on the bottom and surrounds the pot of food. The food inside the pot cooks very slowly, and you could change the temperature with a dial. Chazon Ovadia says you're allowed to use such a thing before Shabbat and to eat it on Shabbat. How? First, you can rely on the opinion of the Ramah, who says hatmana only applies to food you want to eat Friday night, but hatmana doesn't apply to food that you want to eat Shabbat morning, right? Because you don't think about the food at all. What's the problem with hatmana? Why are you not allowed to wrap something before Shabbat with something that adds heat, or wrap something on Shabbat with things that don't add heat? Is because when you wrap it and then you check on it and it's cold, so you might come to heat it up on Shabbat, which is a sur. So therefore, something that you'll leave for Shabbat morning, anyways, you don't want to eat it Friday night, you're going to eat it Shabbat morning, there's no concern that you're going to play with the fire. Okay, second, he says that that even though Shulchan Aruch doesn't agree with the Ramah, we can use the Ramah's opinion to combination of leniencies. Another reason why you're allowed to use the crockpot is because you only violate the Hatmana prohibition, according to some opinions, if you cover the entire pot. In the case of the crockpot, the outer mechanism doesn't cover the top of the pot, only the sides. So therefore, it's not considered Hatmana. That's why it's not proper to cover the crockpot with towels and with other stuff, because then it will be fully insulated. We have to rely on the opinions to say, since the top is not covered with towels, therefore it's permitted. Thirdly, some authorities say you only violate Hatmana if the pot of the food comes in direct contact with the insulating material. In the crock pot, there's a little bit of space, airspace, between the pot and the actual sides of the mechanism. And lastly, there's opinions who say that Hatmana is only applying a situation where you might come to increase the heat in your anxiety to maintain the food's temperature. In the times of Gemara, they used to have coals, and coals were unpredictable. So therefore, it could be that they will come to raise the heat. But in our times, the crock pot stays a certain temperature, and there's no concern. It'll drop. Once you set it to a setting, the electricity is constantly flowing, and it'll always keep that temperature. So therefore, the concern is not so much. Therefore, that's why all these combination of these rulings, of these ideas, you're allowed to use a crock pot with those certain directions that we gave. Okay, section 4 now, on page 428. Finally, the last thing related to Bishul is Chazara. Chazara means returning food onto a covered fire on Shabbat, right? So in the times of Gemara, they were not able, they used to use these coal ovens like we said before. So you're not allowed to put food back on the fire because it looks like cooking, right? If you put it on an open flame. And sometimes it's actually cooking because let's say it's a cold liquid, that's going to be actually cooking. And there's going to be certain conditions we have to adhere to in order to be able to put back food on the fire on Shabbat. Number one may only reheat fully cooked food if it's not placed directly on a fire, rather on top of a pot of food that's on the fire or on a hot plate, because it's going to look like cooking. 2, one may place jachnun or kishka that was fully cooked before Shabbat into a pot of chamin in order to reheat it. That's okay. Even though it looks like you're putting fresh food into the chamin, it looks like you're cooking by putting ingredients into a pot, it's mutar. 3, it is permitted to toast bread on a hot plate, and it's not considered baking when something's already baked. According to Ben Ish Hai, you should know it's a sur. He says you're not allowed to make bread toasty by putting it on the hot plate on Shabbat. But it is permitted. Halachically, it is permitted, Rav Ovadia writes. When warming up bread that's frozen, let's say you have frozen bread from the freezer, you want to heat it up on Shabbat, you have to make sure there's no ice on the bread before putting it on the hot plate. But if there's no ice, mutar to heat up the bread. Number 4, Shulchan Aruch rules that a davar lach, a liquid item, such as water or soup, cannot be reheated once it got cold. Once it got below scalding hot, you're not allowed to reheat liquids. Furthermore, for a liquid item, you may not place the pot on the ground after it's taken off the hot plate. So here, you have a hot soup, and you want to serve lagman to everybody Friday night. So what happens? You take the pot off the fire, off the hot plate, you serve everybody, you could put it back if it's still scalding hot, and you didn't put it on the ground, because if you put it on the ground, now when you put it back on the hot plate, it looks like cooking. It looks like you're putting it the first time, and people are going to say, oh, you put a egg to heat up on the plata. How can you do that? You're cooking on Shabbat. So therefore, to avoid this issue of looks like cooking, you have to be that you never put it on the ground. But once it fully cooled off, so then it's a sur to put it back in regardless, even if you didn't put it on the ground. 5, similarly, a Sephardic Jew may not pour a liquid item that is scalding hot into kli sheni and then put it back on the plata. You can't transfer from the pot into a different pot and then put that pot on the plata. Why? Because now what? I just made a kli sheni. Kli sheni doesn't cook. It lost its power to cook. And now I put it back on the fire. I'm going to make it cook again. So therefore, it'll be a sur. 6, if one's hot plate shut off, chas v'shalom, during Shabbat, and you need to keep the food hot, you can quickly transfer the pots to somebody else's hot plate as long as they're fully cooked and dry, or if it's a liquid, as long as it's scalding hot. But once the pot gotten cold and it's a liquid, you can't put it on another plata because it'll be considered cooking. We'll continue this next time. Baruch Le'olam. Amen.